the darkness of a hospital room, a young woman lay motionless, her heart stopped, and her body still. For 6 minutes, the world had lost her. But what if that moment wasn't the end? What if, in the quiet silence of death, she was called back, not by any earthly force, but by Jesus Christ himself? What message did he have for the world, and for one of the most powerful men on earth, President Donald Trump? When Megan was revived, she wasn't the same person. She had seen beyond the veil. She had seen a divine truth. Now, with a mission to fulfill, she must confront the darkness threatening to divide America, and her message, once delivered, would change the course of history forever. Hold tight. The journey of faith, prophecy, and heroism is about to begin. This is a story you'll never forget. Megan Carter had always been an ordinary girl. She was 25, living in a small town in Pennsylvania, working as a nurse at the local hospital. Her life was routine, predictable. She went to work, came home, spent time with her family, and occasionally went to church on Sundays. There was nothing extraordinary about her until the night everything changed. It was a rainy Friday evening when Megan went to bed, exhausted from a long shift. But sleep didn't come easily that night. As soon as she closed her eyes, she found herself in a place that was neither here nor there, a vast, endless expanse of light. It was warm, welcoming, yet overwhelming. And in the distance, she saw him, Jesus Christ, standing tall and radiant, his eyes filled with compassion and authority. Megan, he called her name softly, and her heart skipped a beat. She couldn't move, couldn't speak. You have been chosen. Her breath caught in her throat. Chosen for what? The warmth of his presence seemed to envelop her, soothing her fears. You are to carry a message, he continued. A message for Donald Trump. Megan's mind raced. Donald Trump? She asked, her voice barely a whisper. Yes, he said firmly. You will deliver this message, and you must be bold. You will not be alone. You are part of a much bigger story. And just as quickly as it had started, the vision faded. Megan woke up with a start, drenched in sweat, her heart pounding. She was back in her bed in her small town. But something had changed. Her life was no longer ordinary. For days, Megan couldn't shake the dream. She tried to push it aside, telling herself it was just a vivid imagination. But there was a nagging feeling in her heart that wouldn't let her forget it. The message from Jesus weighed on her. The dream was too real. It wasn't just a fantasy. She knew that she had been chosen for something. But what did it mean? Why her? And why Donald Trump? Megan wasn't involved in politics. She had never been particularly vocal about her opinions. But the message kept coming back to her, stronger each day. She couldn't ignore it. One Sunday, she decided to speak to her pastor, Pastor John, about the dream. She approached him, unsure of how to even begin. Pastor John, I need to talk to you, Megan said, her voice shaking slightly. The pastor led her into his office. What's on your mind, Megan? I had a dream, she started. It wasn't just a dream. It felt real. I saw Jesus. He told me I was chosen to deliver a message for Donald Trump. Pastor John's expression remained calm, though Megan could see a flicker of curiosity in his eyes. Tell me more, he urged. Megan recounted the dream in as much detail as she could remember. The overwhelming light, the warmth of Jesus' presence, and his words. When she finished, Pastor John sat in silence for a moment, deep in thought. You've had a divine encounter, Megan, he said gently. And it's clear that God has a purpose for you. We may not understand it fully yet, but we must trust in his plan. Megan felt a weight lift off her shoulders. For the first time since the dream, she felt a sense of peace. Megan couldn't ignore the call any longer. She felt a deep, compelling need to reach out to President Donald Trump. But how? How could a small-town nurse like her ever get a message to one of the most powerful men in the world? She started researching. She found email addresses, phone numbers, and even social media accounts. But every time she tried to reach out, her efforts were met with silence. She sent letters, made phone calls, and posted messages online. But nothing. She nearly gave up, thinking maybe she wasn't supposed to be the one to deliver the message after all. But then, one evening, as she sat in her small apartment praying for guidance, she received an unexpected call. Hello? She answered hesitantly. Is this Megan Carter? The voice on the other end was deep, serious. Yes, this is Megan. Who's calling? This is Sarah from the Trump Organization. I've been asked to contact you. We've received your messages, and we believe you have something important to share. Megan's heart skipped. You believe me? Yes, Sarah said. We've been looking into your story, and we think it's time you meet with the president. He's ready to hear what you have to say. 2 weeks later, Megan found herself in a private meeting room in Washington, D.C. She was nervous, her hands trembling as she clutched her Bible. A few security personnel stood at attention in the corners of the room. The air felt thick with anticipation. And then Donald Trump walked in. He was dressed in a dark suit, his expression unreadable. He paused for a moment, studying Meghan with piercing blue eyes before speaking. "You wanted to speak to me, Ms. Carter," he said, his voice steady. Meghan nodded, her throat dry. "Yes, Mr. President. I had a dream, a vision really. I believe it was from God, and I've been chosen to deliver a message to you." Trump raised an eyebrow. "A message from God? Tell me." Meghan took a deep breath and began. "Jesus spoke to me, Mr. President. He told me that you were in the midst of a battle, not just against political opponents, but against forces of darkness that seek to destroy everything this nation stands for. He said you must remain steadfast, even when it feels like the world is turning against you." Trump listened intently, his face growing more serious with each word. "He also told me that you are being prepared for something greater," Meghan continued, "something that will require your courage, your faith, and your strength. But you are not alone. God is with you." The room was silent for a long moment. Finally, Trump spoke. "Why me?" he asked, his voice quiet. Meghan looked him in the eyes. "Because you were chosen, Mr. President. You've been placed in this position for a reason. God has his hand on your life, and he will guide you through this battle. But you must trust in him." Trump stood still for a moment, as if processing her words. Then he nodded slowly. "Thank you, Meghan. I needed to hear this." Meghan's life after that meeting was never the same. She became a quiet yet powerful voice for change. Her message, delivered to Trump, spread across the country like wildfire. People began to understand that the battle America was facing wasn't just political, it was spiritual, and they needed to stand together in faith. Meghan continued her work as a nurse, but her role as a messenger had only just begun. She spoke at churches, in schools, and in communities, urging people to pray and stand firm. She became known as the messenger of hope, a woman who had been given a divine mission to help steer the country through its darkest days. She never sought fame or glory. Her heart was simply filled with gratitude that she had been chosen to be a part of something so much larger than herself. She knew that the future was uncertain, but she also knew that as long as God was with them, they would never be alone. And the message she carried would echo through history, one of faith, hope, and divine purpose. After she had delivered her message, the nation seemed to wake up. A spark of hope began to spread across the land, even amidst political turmoil and the growing tensions between the divided states. Meghan found herself in the spotlight, the quiet, humble nurse from Pennsylvania who had delivered a message of divine intervention. But she did not seek fame. Her heart was focused on the mission. President Trump's approval ratings soared after he publicly acknowledged the vision and the divine support that had been given to him. While skeptics and the media quickly tried to discredit Meghan and the message she had brought, the truth remained undeniable. Across the country, millions were praying for their country, for their leader, and for guidance. Meghan's life had taken a dramatic turn. What had once been an ordinary existence, working at the local hospital and attending church on Sundays, was now a life of requests from the media, church leaders, and even government officials wanting to speak with her. But Meghan remained grounded, keeping her faith strong. Yet, as the message spread, so did the forces that sought to silence it. Darkness lurked just beyond the light, waiting for its moment to strike. It wasn't long before things began to change. As the nation rallied behind Trump, there were those who wanted to see him fall, forces, both earthly and spiritual, that sought to undermine his leadership. Meghan began to experience disturbing visions at night. She saw shadows moving in the corners of her dreams, whispers in languages she could not understand. Every time she woke up, her heart pounded with fear. She could feel the presence of evil stalking her from the depths of her soul. One night she prayed like never before, seeking God's guidance. "Lord, protect me," she whispered. "Give me strength to stand firm." And heard a voice, not a whisper, but clear and strong. "They are coming for you," it said. "The battle has only just begun." The following week, Meghan's worst fears began to materialize. First, it was the media. They labeled her a fraud, a puppet being used by Trump and his supporters. She was called a liar, a charlatan. Social media was flooded with insults and ridicule. But Meghan, determined to stay strong in her faith, blocked out the noise. Then came the threats. Her email inbox, once filled with messages of support, was now filled with death threats. "You should have stayed dead," one read. "We'll take you down," another warned. Meghan's heart trembled, but she knew she couldn't back down. She had been chosen for this task. The forces of darkness were real, but so was the power of God. One night, a man in a black suit appeared at her door. He was tall, with dark sunglasses, his face obscured by shadow. "I know you're receiving threats," he said coldly. "We're here to protect you." The enemy has already infiltrated your life. Unsure of what to say. "Who are you?" "We are part of a network," he said cryptically. "We've been following the message and we know what's coming. You're in danger, but you can't back down. We will protect you, but only if you stay committed." Meanwhile, President Trump had begun to experience his own set of challenges. The more he spoke of God's hand on his leadership, the more he alienated certain factions of the government. Critics within his own party, who once supported him, began to question his faith and motives. One night, after a particularly difficult meeting, Trump sat alone in the Oval Office, feeling the weight of the world on his shoulders. The room was dimly lit and the air felt heavy. He closed his eyes, and that moment he heard it. The voice of Jesus. "You are not alone," Jesus said, his voice as clear as if he were standing right beside him. "I have called you for such a time as this." Trump's heart surged with renewed strength. He knew this was a test of faith, strength, and courage. He could feel the dark forces closing in, but he knew that with God's help, he would overcome. Please take out a minute to like, comment, and share this message with those who need to hear it. Together, we can change the world, one act of faith at a time. As the months passed, the political landscape became more chaotic. The media continued its smear campaign against Trump, and the country was more divided than ever. Protesters filled the streets, voices clamoring for change. But behind it all, the real battle was not political, it was spiritual. Meghan continued to receive visions, each more intense than the last. She saw armies of angels fighting against dark, shadowy figures in the sky. The world was being torn apart by forces that no one could see, but Meghan knew they were. The lines between the physical and the spiritual world were growing thinner, and it was only a matter of time before everything would collide. Meghan reached out to Trump again, urging him to stay strong and remain grounded in his faith. She reminded him of the message Jesus had given her. The battle is not against flesh and blood, but against the principalities and powers of darkness. Trump, more determined than ever, began to speak more openly about his faith. He began holding rallies where he called on the nation to pray together. Slowly, the tide began to shift. People, regardless of their political affiliations, began to come together in prayer, united by a common purpose. But the enemy was not done. The storm was gathering. The attacks against Trump grew fiercer, and Meghan could feel the danger closing in on all sides. The darkness that had been stalking her was no longer subtle. It had found her. One evening, as she walked home from the hospital, she felt something watching her. Suddenly, a black van pulled up beside her. Two men in dark clothing jumped out, grabbing her before she could react. They pulled her into the van and drove off into the night. Her heart raced, but in that moment she remembered the promise she had received from Jesus, "You are not alone." She closed her eyes, praying for protection, and just as quickly as they had come, the men stopped the van. One of them stepped out, looking confused. "We've been compromised," he muttered. The van door flew open, and Meghan was pulled to safety by the group that had been following her. They had arrived just in time. As the political landscape continued to devolve into chaos, Meghan saw the deepening divide in the nation. Riots erupted in major cities. Families turned against each other. And through it all, the message she had carried, the message of hope, began to feel more urgent. Meghan prayed fervently, asking God for strength. "Lord, what is your will in all of this? What should I do?" The answer came quickly. "You must speak," God said. "The nation is in turmoil, but it can be healed through faith." Meghan knew what she had to do. She couldn't hide in the shadows any longer. The world needed to hear the truth. Meghan took to social media and the airwaves. She spoke to churches, to communities, and to the world. She urged everyone to pray for the strength to face the darkness, to trust in God's will, and to stand firm in their faith. The nation was at a crossroads, but the power of prayer and unity could change everything. Trump, emboldened by Meghan's message, stood before the nation once again. This time, he wasn't just speaking as a politician, he was speaking as a man of faith. "My fellow Americans," he began, his voice steady, "we are facing dark times. But I believe that with God's help, we will overcome. We must stand together in prayer. We must stand together in faith." Meghan watched from her home, her heart swelling with pride. She knew the battle was far from over, but the seed of hope had been planted. As the darkness drew closer, it became clear that the final battle was near. The enemy's forces were strong, but Meghan and Trump knew they had the ultimate weapon, faith in God. On the eve of the final showdown, Meghan knelt in prayer, surrounded by those who had joined her in this fight. Together, they prayed for strength, for courage, and for victory. Suddenly, a bright light filled the room. "It is time," Jesus spoke, his voice filled with both authority and love. And in that moment, Meghan knew the truth. Victory was already won. The nation, torn by division and fear, had found unity once again. Through faith and prayer, the darkness had been defeated. President Trump, with Meghan by his side, stood at the front lines of this new movement, a nation reborn in faith and hope. Meghan knew the battle would never truly end. There would always be challenges, always be forces seeking to divide. But she had seen the truth. God's power could overcome anything. And now, as the sun rose over a new America, she knew that the message she had delivered was more than just words. It was a call to action. A call for faith, for unity, and for hope. Years passed since the battle for America's soul had been won. The world had changed in ways no one could have anticipated. The political landscape had evolved, but one thing remained constant. The message that Meghan had delivered to President Trump, the nation and the world: faith, unity, and hope. Meghan, now a woman in her late 30s, stood in a quiet church, the same one where she had once prayed for guidance in the darkest of times. The walls of the church had remained the same, ancient, filled with a history of hope and redemption. But the world outside was far from what it had been when she had first received the message from Jesus Christ himself. It was a different world now, a better world perhaps, but still not free of struggles. Yet the nation had found a new strength, a strength that came from a shared belief in something greater than politics, greater than any earthly power. It was a strength born from the unwavering faith that God's will would always prevail no matter the obstacles. Meghan had watched, through the years, as millions across the globe came together in prayer. The seeds she had planted had sprouted into a movement, one that went beyond mere politics, one that touched the hearts of individuals across the world. People had stood up, united under the banner of faith. They had found the courage to confront their fears and face the future with hope, knowing that no matter how dark the times, God's light would guide them. President Trump, after years of battling against political adversaries and critics, had become a beacon of faith in the public eye. Though the world still threw its challenges his way, he stood firm. His faith had only grown stronger, and his leadership, though controversial, was a testament to the power of divine purpose. And it wasn't just about Trump anymore. The movement was bigger than any one person. It was a movement of believers, of ordinary people who, like Meghan, had seen a glimpse of the divine. They had seen the truth. There was a battle for the soul of the world, but that battle was already won. And through faith, through standing firm, they could endure anything. Meghan's life had changed in more ways than she could count. She had been asked to speak in churches, at rallies, and on global platforms. Her words were not just of prophecy, but of encouragement. She was no longer just the young woman who had died and returned with a message. She was a symbol of perseverance, of faith, and of the power of the divine. But she never lost sight of the mission. She knew her work wasn't over. The world still needed guidance, and though the dark forces had been pushed back, they were always lurking, waiting for a chance to regain ground. Meghan dedicated herself to helping others find their faith and stay true to the path God had laid before them. She worked alongside church leaders, counselors, and activists, spreading the word and ensuring that the next generation understood the importance of standing firm in the face of adversity. She worked to create support networks for those struggling in their faith and for communities facing crisis. Meghan's message was clear: never lose hope, for with God, all things are possible. The nation itself was no longer the same. Political parties had redefined themselves with a focus on values that transcended partisan divides. People of all faiths had come together, united under the banner of the one truth they all shared, that God had a plan for the world, and that plan would come to fruition. While there were still challenges to face, issues of poverty, inequality, and division, the nation had learned how to come together in prayer and in action. There was no longer a feeling of helplessness, no longer the same bitterness that had once divided the country. Americans, regardless of their political affiliations, had learned to prioritize their faith and their values over their differences. Communities had begun to thrive as they worked together in the spirit of unity and mutual care. Churches had become centers of support, not just for the faithful, but for anyone in need. Families had been healed, relationships had been restored, and a sense of peace had washed over the land. It was a far cry from the division that had once seemed insurmountable. The message Meghan had brought had, over time, become the guiding principle of a new generation, one that was determined to make the world a better place, not by force, but by the strength of their faith. Though Meghan had long since passed her message on to the world, she knew that the battle was ongoing. The forces of darkness still sought to divide, still worked to undermine the unity that had been forged. But Meghan knew, deep down, that God's will was unshakable. Every day, new believers rose to the call. Her story continued to inspire others. People came to her from all walks of life, seeking guidance, seeking hope. She had written books that had inspired millions, sharing her experiences and lessons learned. People who had once been skeptical now found themselves on their knees, seeking divine help and guidance, knowing that God was watching over them. The rallies, the prayers, the moments of unity, these were the moments that defined the new era. People had learned that the most powerful weapon in the fight against the darkness was faith. A faith that could not be shaken by the winds of doubt, by the fires of adversity, or by the attacks of the enemy. Megan never sought glory or attention. She was humble in every sense, always reminding others that it wasn't about her. It was about the message she had received, the mission she had been given. It was about bringing the world back to the truth, back to God's love and grace. And so, as she stood in the church, now filled with hundreds of people who had gathered for a special service to honor her message, she realized something profound. Her work wasn't just about her time on earth. It was about the generations that would come after her. It was about ensuring that future generations would never forget the truth, that God was always with them. The battle had not just been won, it had been passed on. The future was in the hands of those who would rise to the challenge, who would keep the faith, and who would continue to fight for what was right, no matter the cost. Megan closed her eyes in the church, standing before the altar with her hands clasped together. A deep sense of peace filled her soul as she whispered a prayer. Lord, I thank you for the strength you've given me. I thank you for the opportunity to serve, to share your message with the world. I know the road ahead will not always be easy, but I trust in you. I trust in your plan. May your will be done in me and in all who hear your call. Amen. And as she opened her eyes, she looked around at the faces in the pews, faces full of hope, of faith, of love. The next generation. The next chapter. The battle was far from over, but the victory had already been won. If you believe in the power of God's will, in the strength of unwavering faith, and in the hope that His light will always prevail over darkness, share this message. The battle for the soul of the world continues, but we are not alone. Together we can overcome any obstacle. Stand firm in your faith, share the truth, and let the world know that with God all things are possible. Like, comment, and share this message with those who need to hear it. Together, we can change the world, one act of faith at a time.